Welcome everybody. Meredith Cowley here from Custom B&B, coming to have a chat today with the wonderful Veronica from Centa Insurance, because whilst it might be a tedious or challenging topic to get your head around, it's a pretty critical one. And Veronica has very kindly agreed to share her time with us today and answer a range of questions that I have gathered, some from you guys and some that I've come up with myself. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments and I will do my best to ask and get them up to Veronica during this session. Or if we can't get to them today, we can put write in the comments afterwards the answers. Or of course you can always DM us and we'll do our best to respond to you. So if you're here, if you're listening, certainly give us a hi, a wave. Just let us know that you're listening, and if it's of value to you, that would be wonderful. We'd certainly appreciate. And if you're listening on the replay later on, let us know. #replay. Let us know if it's been of value to you. Hit us up with any questions. So without any further ado, I'm going to let Veronica introduce herself properly and provide her disclaimer, because we are providing information today and not advice. Veronica is a host herself, so she gets this space, and that's why I thought it was so valuable to have her on board, because she has her head in both spaces of insurance and hosting. So I think it's a specialty, and she brings heaps of wisdom with her. So Veronica, can you tell us a bit about your hosting story and then how you got into this area, and fill in our listeners with who you are?
Yeah, sure. Okay. I live in Williamstown in Melbourne, and I'm an empty nester. So I've got a beautiful townhouse in Williamstown, and the ground floor of that is like a self-contained apartment. My first experience with Airbnb was when I went with my kids, my grown-up kids, to New York in 2013, I think it was. We stayed in an Airbnb, and it was really new at that time to us. And the kids said to me, "Oh, you should do this at your place." And so I did, and that's how I got into hosting in the first place. Now, before we go on, I know this is going to be horribly boring, but I have to do this for legal reasons. Yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to dive in. So I just want to give you the disclaimer that anything that I'm going to talk about today is actually just general advice. So it's not specific advice to your situation. So the information provided by me today is for general information only, and it's not a substitute for professional specific advice. You should always consider the PDS and policy wordings before making a decision about insurance, and coverage may differ based on specific clauses in individual policies. If you want specific advice, please get in touch with me and we can have a chat. So that's that boring bit. Yeah, and just to finish off on who I am and my experience, apart from hosting in my own home, which I recommend as a good way to get started in hosting, it's kind of like cutting your teeth. I have also owned and leased and sublet properties as well. So I had 6 going at one time. I don't do it anymore simply because my insurance practice has just gotten so busy. It's crazy. And so I've had experience of that rental arbitrage sort of space as well. And I got really into Airbnb insurance, or this what we call short stay insurance, because I realised when I started hosting that there were very few, if any, suitable insurance products on the market. And I started doing a whole lot of research, and I realised, what a problem this was. And so I was actually trying to solve my own problem. That's how I got into it.
And did you have a money background before that, or an insurance background before that, or you've just gone?
No.
Yeah.
No, I did. Well, I had actually been. Look, I had sort of another business which was kind of related to insurance referrals, but it wasn't specifically that. But I have had many years of owning my own business. And I've had businesses in the construction industry. I've had believe it or not, I've had a Thai massage business that had 5 shops. I employed more than 30 Thai masseurs.
Wow.
So I started off in the airline industry, so it's been very random.
Yeah. What awesome, the diverse experience though.
Yeah.
Fantastic. But lots of business experience too.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
really
And now
Okay.
lots of insurance experience too.
Yeah. So, well, why is a conversation about insurance so critical for landlords and property managers? Can you give me examples of where insurance has been really valuable and why it's important?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about landlord insurance, and particularly in the short stay space.
Yeah.
I think people are confused about whether they need landlord insurance. A lot of people think that if they have any insurance at all on their property, then that's good enough, and they don't need any more. So in other words, they might have a home insurance or home and contents policy on their property, and what they don't realise is that that is absolutely not appropriate cover if you're letting out any part of the property. So if you've got tenants in there, if you're earning an income from that property, then you must have landlord cover. So you know, and I come across people every day who completely did not know that. So you know, I'm very often having that conversation with people about why it's necessary. It gets very complicated and very muddy where you have a scenario where you have people that have, say, a dual occupancy, or they're using their primary residence for hosting. So they might have a granny flat in the backyard that they're letting out on short stay, or like me, you know, they might have a house where they're living upstairs and there's a short stay suite downstairs. It becomes a lot more complicated in that scenario, and that's a scenario where typically people have only got like home insurance and they don't understand that they actually need more than that. The other thing is that some people think that like there is this thing called short stay insurance that is kind of like some kind of an overlay that makes everything okay. So you keep your existing insurance and then you sort of bung something on the top of it. That's problematic for a number of reasons. It's often the case that, I mean, if you had just like a standard home insurance, quite often, like no matter what you put on top of that, if that home insurer finds out that you're short stay letting, many of them will void your cover, even if you have got some sort of a top up. And of course that varies, and you need to check with your own insurer. As I said, you know, this is just me generally talking about experiences here. It's not, I'm not speaking to any specific person here, but it is something to be aware of. And the other thing is that I come across quite often is people, especially when they're just starting out, starting to get insurance or looking at starting their short stay hosting next week or next month, they'll get, you know, I'll give them the quote, you know, we'll work out what the best solution is. They get their quote and then they say, oh, okay, well, we'll start the insurance next month because right now I haven't got guests. Well, the thing is, you need that property covered 24/7. You know, not just when you've got guests, it needs to be covered all the time because there are many things that happen to properties that have nothing to do with guests. For instance, there could be a storm, there could be water damage, you know, a pipe could burst, all sorts of things can happen. So, yeah.
Veronica, we've had a question come through. Could you explain what the difference between landlord insurance and home and contents insurance is, please?
Okay. Generally speaking, landlord insurance in terms of the coverage, and again, like there's many different policies, many different insurers, they all vary, but just in general terms, a landlord policy is similar to a home and contents policy in that it usually covers property, like, you know, building and contents. However, there are sort of two major differences between the two. With a home policy, generally you are mostly most of the time covered for what they call temporary accommodation, and that's where, I mean, imagine it's your own home, something happens, I don't know, there's a damage event, the property's damaged, you need to move out for a period of time while it's being fixed. So just say there was a flood or some sort of water escaped, all your carpets were ruined, they had to take up your floors. Well, then the insurer, if you have that kind of coverage in your home insurance, then most likely the insurer will pay for your accommodation while they're fixing your home. A landlord policy doesn't cover that because it's assumed by the nature of the policies that the owner is not living in the property, right? So it does not need that sort of accommodation. The other area where there's kind of a gap or a difference between the two types of cover is that home policies, you know, because it's like your personal home, it will usually, well, it does cover your personal effects. Personal effects are your personal property, like your clothing, your shoes, your personal electronics, those, you know, your jewellery, that kind of thing. Those are personal effects. So a home policy will usually cover that, where a landlord policy, of course, is not going to cover the owner's personal effects because it is assumed the owner is not living at the property. So that's kind of the two fundamental differences between the two types. It's what we call classes of insurance. So a home policy is one class of insurance. A landlord policy is a different class of insurance.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I think you've explained that really well. Thank you. Yeah. And in a way, actually, I mean, I understood the difference, but it was clarifying, actually. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to learn a lot today. I am 100% sure about that.
Yeah. So, and again, can I just one more thing, and that is that if you have a home insurance policy and you have, again, a paying tenant living in that property, even if it's like a standalone property that you're renting, you're not living in it, but you, for whatever reason, you've put a home policy on it, in the event of a claim, the insurer, you know, may give you some grief about that if you've been letting that property out.
Yeah. So if we are, because we're talking about short-term rentals and we're not talking about long-term, so we're not talking about that long-term tenant. I mean, I think that's kind of much clearer. Let's head into that grey space for a minute. So what insurance types are there for landlords and property managers to consider? I mean, do we get all of them? So as a landlord and you're putting it on the short-term rental space, do you get landlord's insurance? Is there a short stay kind of specific one?
Okay, these are two different topics, right? One is landlord cover, which covers the property, right? Gotcha. And certainly any property that is being let out needs to have landlord insurance, right? So, and that is usually in the name of the owner of the property, right? So the owner of the property is the insured party. So that, you know, you've got to have that. You know, you've got to make sure that that property is covered under a landlord policy. The issue of property managers, that's a whole other kettle of fish. That's a different class of insurance completely. So basically, the definition, broadly speaking, of a property manager would be somebody who is managing a property on behalf of a landlord. And that could be short or long stay. But property managers really should have two types of insurance at the very least, and that is professional indemnity and public liability. Professional indemnity is really important. So professional indemnity covers the policyholder for claims of errors and omissions. So in other words, if you as a property manager make a mistake or you omit to do something, you make an error or whatever in the management of that property. So you might give poor advice to the landlord, or you may have forgotten to carry out one of the duties that you are contractually obligated to do, and that has led to a financial loss for the landlord, then they could potentially sue you. And that's where professional indemnity will cover you for that. And public liability would cover you for claims, third-party claims of personal injury or property damage. So ideally, you'd want to get a combined professional indemnity and public liability policy, because claims could go that way or they could go that way. You know, we can't predict what a claim looks like or how a claim might arise. It may end up being professional indemnity claim, or on the other hand, it might end up being a public liability claim. That's why it's good to have a combined policy. Property managers are, I mean, that profession is actually very much prone to professional indemnity claims, and they can be ugly. So.
Yeah, that's good to know. So in terms of public liability, though, would not the owner of the property be taking that out?
No. The owner of the property would have a landlord policy, and as he is the insured on that policy, the landlord policies generally, or all the ones I've ever seen, they've always got public liability built in.
Yep. Cool. Okay, cool. Thank you. So we've talked a bit about, needing to you've mentioned like letting insurers know that you are listing your property in the short-term rental space.
Yes.
So I've heard the words duty of disclosure bandied around. Do you want to just explain what duty of disclosure means in this space?
Well, duty of disclosure means that you need to disclose anything that will be of importance to the insurer and that will affect certainly the cover or the premium. So the information you give the insurer is vitally important. If you leave out some critical bit of information that the insurer is not aware of, and then there's a claim that involves that particular thing, then there's a fair chance that the insurer is going to say, well, I didn't know about that, or you didn't tell us that,
yes.
And it could be a problem. So in terms of like a landlord policy, a lot of clients believe that like a landlord policy is a landlord policy, and that's all there is to it. There are landlord policies that are specifically designed for or endorsed for short stay letting. There's only a few insurers who do it, right? Mm-hmm. So just because you have a landlord policy does not mean it's suitable for short stay. Yep. Generally they would mention the words short stay or some words to that effect in the policy schedule. So if you have a landlord policy and it doesn't mention short stay anywhere, I would be concerned that may not be appropriate cover. And as I said, there's only a small handful of landlord insurance policies that actually allow it, or insurers that do it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So yes, I was reading I was reading one the other day. Actually, it was very explicit that it did short stay, so it was really helpful.
Yeah.
So are there any insurers covering rental loss because of COVID? Any for short stay rental loss?
Well, this is an area where people get confused again. Mm-hmm. There's two things. We've got loss of rent and we've got rent default.
Yep.
Right?
Okay.
Two very separate covers. Rent default is something that's only applicable to long-term landlord policies. It does not apply to short stay. Okay, rent default is defined as being, for instance, if you have a tenant, and this is a long-term tenant who pays like monthly rent. If a tenant absconds owing you rent, then you can claim if you have rent default cover. Now, first of all, not applicable to short stay anyway, but the other issue is that right now, because of COVID-19 and all the dramas around, landlords and trying to evict people and all of that, it's very, very difficult to get rent default cover now anyway. But since we're not talking about long term, it's not applicable. Loss of rent is the other thing that people are always very confused about. So loss of rent is usually, and again, you need to read your policy wording for the specific wording and the benefits, but loss of rent generally only kicks in when there has been damage to the property. So for instance, using again our example of, there's been water damage to the property, the carpets are saturated, you can't let the property out. So, you might have short stay bookings in there. You have to cancel the bookings because you obviously need to get the carpet replaced. The property is off the market for a month while that's all happening. Then you can claim loss of rent. Generally, loss of rent is an optional cover, generally. Okay, on most policies that I've seen, it's optional. So you don't have to have loss of rent cover. If you haven't taken it out and you haven't paid for that extra cover, then you can't claim it. But if your policy has that option and you do take loss of rent, then you can only claim it if the property's been damaged. You cannot claim it because it's been a bad month and you've had no guests.
Because of COVID.
Or for any reason.
Okay. Yeah, so
a downturn in business. Well, certainly not for COVID, because that's always an exclusion. But I mean, and I have had, trust me, many phone calls from policyholders. Oh, it's been a terrible month. We've had no bookings, and especially when COVID happened, of course, the first time, that was certainly the case. And because they had loss of rent cover, they assumed that they could make a claim against the policy. But yeah, as I said, the policy generally is triggered. Loss of rent is triggered by damage to property. COVID is not damage to property.
Gotcha. Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And if anyone's got any other questions, certainly send them through, and I'll put them to Veronica. We've got a few more to keep going through. I'm really curious to see if there's any, you've got any stories about, when insurance cover hasn't been right. I think it's always easy to relate when there's a story. Can you tell us one?
Yeah, I've got a lot of anecdotes and things, and I always have to be careful how I relate these. I guess one of the things
not identifiable.
Yeah. One of the things that we are always very careful to warn people about is and this all again comes into the area of disclosure, is about deciding your sums insured. Now that means, if it's a landlord policy, you have to tell us what is the replacement value of your building, what is the replacement value of your contents, and that's what they're insured for. And it needs to be the replacement value. So that's not like an arbitrary figure. It's not, let's say $500,000 for the building, and then we get the quote and the premium's pretty high, and you say, okay, in that case we're going to change it to $300,000. We see this happen all the time. And I mean, it can't be 500,000 or 300,000. That there is a number. What is the replacement value of your building? Now, it's the same with contents, and one of the dangers of this, of getting this wrong, is that in the event of a claim, if you have deliberately underinsured your property, because you didn't want to pay that higher premium, which is really cutting off your nose to spite your face, it can backfire on you, because the insurer, if they feel that you've done that in order to jib them out of premium, then they may reduce your payout, or they might even void the claim, in extreme circumstances. So it doesn't serve you anyway. So we did have one case of this going back a little while ago. It was actually on a commercial policy. It wasn't a landlord policy, but it was a business that had insured their contents for $50,000. And that's what they said their contents were worth in their office. And then there was a water damage event, and it ruined a lot of the stuff in the office. They made an insurance claim, and they were claiming, for their contents. So they wanted, and the thing that was, they had one big ticket item that was a printer, like a large format printer, and that large format printer was worth $50,000. And so the insurer has turned up, the assessor, and taken a look around and said, well, okay, if that printer's worth $50,000 and that's ruined, and you're insured for $50,000, what about all your other contents here in the office? Which you said, I mean, you have supposedly said that 50,000 is the entire value. So in the end, what happened was that insurance claim, that the payout was reduced, like the insurer actually penalised them for undervaluing their contents. So they did not get the full amount paid out.
Gosh.
So that's the kind of thing that can happen, and that's sort of like a bit of a morality tale on why it's important to sort of not mess around with your son's insured.
Be honest in it, yeah, and I guess, and if
Yeah.
you don't know, get a quote for it, I guess.
Well, there are, like, again, we have a lot of queries from our clients. They say, oh, I don't know what my building's worth. I don't know what my contents are worth. And we understand that can be hard. And many times they ask us, they say, oh, what should we insure our contents for? I don't know what contents you've got. You could have the Mona Lisa hanging on your wall. I wouldn't know. So we absolutely cannot advise. But what I can say is that there are many, many calculators available online. If you look up building insurance, sum insured calculator, or words to that effect, or contents calculator, there are lots of different tools that you can access, and where you can just go through them and say, okay, well, I've got a 3-bedroom house, and I've got fridges and freezers and whatever else you've got, and it will sort of suggest, just to give you a pretty good guide of what you should insure your property for.
Absolutely, and I can certainly say I've done that many a time for my properties. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
All righty. So, how do you make sure you've taken out the right insurance?
Well, I think doing it yourself, and I know this sounds a bit self-serving, but when you've got a business of any sort, I think DIY insurance can be dangerous. And there are, like, a lot of online insurers these days where people can sort of help themselves and go through and quote and get insurance policies online. That's great, and it's certainly convenient, but I think quite often people are not aware of all the different ways that they might have an exposure for the particular business that they're in. In the short stay space, it's really fairly clear that you need to use a broker, because first of all, it can be complicated, and especially if you're doing something a little bit complicated, like hosting in your own primary residence. Then you certainly need the advice of a broker. And the thing is that there are very few options available online anyway for short stay. Nearly all of the short stay landlord policies that are out, the products that are out there, most of them are broker only products.
Okay, that's really interesting to know. Gosh, right.
Yeah, there are one or two that you can DIY online, but mostly they're broker only.
Okay, cool. Okay. And that was one of my questions, what's the difference between getting a direct one and a broker issued one? Are they better products, different products, better cost effective? What's
they can be. Like, it's hard to say. I can't sort of make statements about, I mean, everybody's property is different. So, like, that's really hard to say. It's about availability as well, and I think people need to be aware that things change all the time, especially with short stay, and certainly at the moment with COVID, it has actually thrown the insurance market into turmoil in some classes of insurance. I know that, for instance, everybody would have heard of Terry Shear, and Terry Shear used to do short stay landlords policies, no problem. Now, I believe for the last few months, and again, these things have changed. I'm not sure what the status is today. I haven't checked, but last time I checked, Terry Shear is no longer doing short stay for new business, right? And then there's share cover. Share cover is a type of insurance that you can buy by the slice, or you used to also be able to buy annual policies. I believe they have stopped doing annual policies, and I think at the moment you can only buy them by the night. That kind of cover, which works out expensive if you're doing it sort of, long term and full time. But again, you need to check those things. And some of the other sort of bigger insurers who did used to do short stay have actually withdrawn from short stay and won't do it anymore. So I've actually had a lot of clients come to me recently and say, oh, we used to be with this insurer or that insurer, and they're no longer doing short stay, so we're looking for another solution now. So things change all the time, and you do need to check, the status.
Yeah. No, sounds completely appropriate to be to be liaising with someone like yourself, given the changes. And I know when we were talking, because I have some and you've mentioned it yourself, you used to have some leasing model properties, which means, so that's the model where they call it arbitrage over in the US. I think it's rent to rent in the UK, and here we call it the leasing models or subletting model. So where you rent out the property directly from the owner, so you pay a normal rent or lease, and then with their permission you sublet it on Airbnb. And I've got a couple of those properties left, and I do have some insurance from them still, but I understand that's getting harder and harder to find insurers who cover that type of model. Yeah,
it is. Yep, absolutely. The insurers hate it, to be honest, and it's a real struggle. We're always looking for solutions for that particular issue, and the insurers just do not want a bar of it. It's because, well, one of the reasons is because you've got sort of one more party in between the property owner and the guest, who's kind of the end user, if you like, so you've got that person in between, and the insurers are just very wary of it, and they really don't want to touch it, so very hard to get covered for that.
Do you provide any advocacy and claims management at all? Do sometimes brokers do that if you have to make a claim?
It's part of a broker's job.
Okay.
That is one of the benefits and one of the reasons to use a broker. That it's advisable to use a broker, because you've got an advocate, in your corner, in the event of a claim. I mean, some claims are really simple, and other claims can be absolutely ugly. And of course, like, the broker is not the insurer; they're the intermediary. When you DIY your insurance, so you bought it directly online, there's nobody between you and the insurer. And I mean, most sort of average citizens don't know the ins and outs of insurance and claims and all the rest of it, and they may not get the best outcome if they don't have a broker who is working on their behalf to get the best possible outcome. So for speaking for myself and for Centa, my business, we actually have a dedicated claims team who are very, very experienced, and so in the first instance, if any of our clients suffer a claim, they would ring us, and they get me, and then we have a look at that, and we help them through that process, and to try and get the best possible outcome from the insurer.
It's good to know, actually, that they to ring you guys first, or your broker, whoever your broker is, and just as a starting point, rather than ringing directly through to the insurer straight up.
That's right. When you've got a broker, like, they're called an intermediary for a reason, right? So like any of our insurers, where there is like a landlord policy in place, like, we are we're the go-to, right? So there's not really a direct link between the client and the insurer. The insurer would expect the clients to go through the broker.
Gotcha. Perfect. Okay. That's sort of coming to the end of all my questions. Do you have any other pearls of wisdom that you just think, right, I've got to make sure that everybody knows and understands this?
Right. Okay. I'd say my one advice is something I've already just covered, and that is basically that there are advantages to using a broker, and it's probably not advisable to DIY your insurance, even though, as I said, it sounds a bit self-serving. But STR insurance can be complicated. There are pitfalls and things that you kind of need to know about, and you need to have the right cover, and I don't know that everybody's really going to get the best result if they try and DIY. And having insurance cover too is not just about the price. I mean, obviously, nobody wants to pay high insurance premiums, but you need the right coverage. Otherwise, why have you got it? That's important to understand. Like, don't shoot yourself in the foot by underquoting your sums insured, or not disclosing, some of the information, because, you could come to regret it sort of at claim time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, that sort of comes to the end of all my sort of queries and our Facebook, any questions on our group for now. So I've got 5 questions that I like to ask all of my guests at the end of an interview, just so we get to know you a bit better. So are you ready for my 5 quick questions?
Yes, I'm ready.
Where is your next holiday destination?
Well, I'm desperately trying to get over to Perth, because my daughter's there, and she's going to be having a baby shortly. And it's been really hard the last year, not being able to get. I did actually manage to sneak over just before Christmas for 10 days, and I was going to go straight back again after Christmas, because I'm based in Melbourne. And of course, that's just been a disaster. So I don't know that you'd call it a holiday, but certainly Perth would be my next trip out of state if I can.
Yes. I jumped on the plane last weekend. It was very amazing. It was like a brand new experience. It's been a long time. I was feeling very bold. Yep.
Yeah.
If you're in lockdown again,
yep,
it's a chance for us here. Which celebrity would you like to be locked down with?
Oh, easy. Judge Judy.
Judge Judy. Fantastic. Why Judge Judy?
Yep, I would love to be locked down with Judge Judy, because I would pick her brains, I tell you, and when you sort of see some of the people she has to deal with, I think there's a lot to learn there. She's got a lot of pearls of wisdom herself.
There'd be some awesome banter, that's for sure. Yep.
Yeah.
What book are you currently reading?
Well, I've just picked one up. It's called A Little Life by Hanya Yanagira. Don't ask me what it's about, because right now I don't know. I'm only on about page 3. So, but it's about that thick. So it's probably another lockdown project.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, I haven't had much time to read lately.
Yeah. Favorite podcast?
Yeah, it was one I actually looked at a little while ago, or listened to, I should say. It's called White Silence. It's about, and some people might remember this, Air New Zealand flight to Mount Erebus back in when was that? Was it the 80s? An Air New Zealand flight basically flew into the down to the Antarctic and flew into the side of a mountain, and everybody was killed, of course. And it just sort of talked about the ensuing investigation, and like there are all kinds of outcomes and dilemmas, sort of for government, and all sorts of things came of it. It was a fascinating listen. So yeah, it's called White Silence. So
intriguing. Yeah. Oh, gosh. Yeah. Sounds really interesting. I like those kind of ones. Are you a dog or a cat lover?
Oh, this might be a bit polarizing, but I'm actually a cat lover. I don't mind dogs. I just wouldn't have one myself for a number of reasons. But my daughter in Perth, she actually runs a Shar-Pei rescue. So whenever I'm in Perth, I'm surrounded by Shar-Peis. But I've always had cats. Unfortunately, I don't want to have one at the moment, because I had to have my very, very old cat put down a little while ago, and it's so heartbreaking. I'm not over it yet. So
yeah, fair enough. I understand.
Yeah.
Totally understand. Yeah. Well, thank you so very, very much for your time. And I think you've left me with a hell of a lot of things I need to go and follow up with, and be really conscious of. I think you've added so much really valuable information. Everybody, if you need to get in contact with Veronica, you can send her a message. She's tagged in this post, so you can send her a private message, or we might put her email and contact details into the comments underneath this post as well. But certainly she'll be, she's been so generous with her information in some other Facebook groups, and so she certainly wants to make sure, I guess, us as managers and as hosts are safe and protected, and that our guests are protected as well. So we're very grateful for your generosity of time and information and knowledge.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's been great. Thanks, Meredith.